Hey friends, it's RSKT, and in today's video I want to show you how I used Affinity Designer to create a small logo to go on a hoodie. So about a year ago I moved to the coast, and it was really far away from a lot of the friends that I knew and loved, and in this area I probably knew about 2 people. I didn't really have any other way to meet people because I work from home, and those guys were really into rock climbing. The only problem was that even though they were asking me to go rock climbing with them all the time, I'm actually terrified of heights. I really can't even go up a ladder. I get a little bit of vertigo. It's not fun. So the idea of rock climbing didn't really appeal to me all that much, but the idea of hanging out with a group of people every week really did. So one thing led to another, and now I do bouldering like 3 times a week. I've done top roping a handful of times. I went outdoor bouldering, and most recently I did my first outdoor top roping session, and it was really great. We went for a climb up one of our local mountains. It was really, really beautiful, although quite cold, and we got to work. We set up some ropes and just did a few different climbs in a couple of different spots. I really enjoyed the experience. I'm still absolutely terrified of heights, and looking down every once in a while really made me freeze up, but it's fun sort of going outside of your comfort zone, and I'm kind of forever eternally grateful for that. So cheers guys. So yeah, these guys have been super generous to me. They've taken me to a lot of really fun events, gotten me involved in a whole new sport and hobby, and they even gave me a pair of climbing shoes, which, you know, those things aren't cheap. So I wanted to somehow find a way to make it up to them, and I thought it would be a really fun idea to create a small logo design to go on some hoodies just in time for winter. We have a Facebook Messenger chat called We Climb Rocks for Fun, so I figured I'd make a little We Climb Rocks for Fun logo and whack it on some hoodies. So the 6 of us all up, including myself, so that was going to be 6 hoodies. We've got Phoebe, Sam, and Liam. And there's also Dan and James, but I don't have any footage of those guys, so maybe I'll flash up a couple of pictures. I wanted to treat this like I would any other design process by setting up some drafts and presenting it to the guys, and then seeing what they had to say about it, just so everybody was on the same page and happy with what they were getting, and then go ahead and make the final result. So let's have a look at how I went about doing that. So the first step of the design process obviously is creating drafts. I wanted to come up with several different designs so I could share them around with the group, see what everybody thought of them, and then decide on something unanimously. I knew that I wanted We Climb Rocks for Fun to be in a circular shape with an icon of some sort in the middle, and I wanted it to pretty much be in stark black and white. So the first design I came up with was just of a simple rope and carabiner in a kind of triangular shape living within the circle. I wasn't too fond of this one myself, but I felt that I should include it because it definitely got the message of climbing or rock climbing across. The second one was a little bit more awkward and detailed. I kind of liked the triangular shape that I had in the carabiner draft, but this one I wanted to keep that triangular shape with having the rope going up to the top of the circle and coming down, but having a rock climber sort of floating in the middle. I wasn't really sure how I was going to pull this off if I did choose this one, just because I did want the whole design to be in black and white. I mean, it's definitely doable, but I think it would have been a lot more work and it wouldn't read as well from a distance. The third draft that I came up with was just a simple hand grabbing onto a rock wall. I felt that this design worked really well in the way that the main focus of it was centered and it looked like it fit really good in the circle. But I was a little bit concerned that people wouldn't be able to understand that the hand was clinging to the rock, so I just needed to make sure that the rock wall itself was done right. The final design was just of a person sitting in their harness, sort of hanging off of a cliff face, and although I did like this design, we all just kind of felt like it was too cliched. And you know, when you Google rock climbing logos, there's about 101 different logos that kind of look exactly like this. So in the end, we went with the hand. So now it was time to jump into Affinity Designer. I decided to use my iPad for this because I was still considered this the drafting stage at this point, but later on I wound up using the same file all the way through to the finish, which I'll talk a bit more about later on as it resulted in a slightly messy workflow. But to get started with, I basically tried to just sketch over my original sketch for the hand just to see how it would turn out. I wasn't really happy with the result of this. Like, yeah, it looked like a hand, but it didn't look like a good hand or a realistic hand in any way. So I decided to scrap that idea and actually take a photo of my hand pretending to climb onto some sort of rock and then trace over the top of it. I'm really glad that I wound up taking this approach because it sort of allowed me to play around with how much or how little detail I wanted in the overall design. Now you'll see me flicking around through a lot of different tools here, and basically what I'm doing is drawing everything with vector strokes and then expanding them to be thicker sort of shapes and then merging all of those shapes together so that all of the line work is basically just one shape. The main reason I was doing this is because originally I wanted this design to be screen printed. Screen printers rely on vector graphics to get the job done. And so making sure that everything is one black or one white shape in the end is key for that to happen. We wound up going with direct to garment printing, so it was unnecessary, but it was still a good exercise to go through. Now it was time for me to draw the rock wall that the hand was climbing onto, and to be honest with you, I had a lot of problem in this department. I don't really draw rocks very often, and I especially don't draw rocks sort of front on and within a frame where you have to know that they are rocks. You can't just sort of see that they're sitting under a tree or next to a bush. So yeah, I actually found this quite challenging. I looked at some reference images of rocks. I wanted it to maintain the sort of stenciled style that I'd done the hand in as well. So yeah, there was a lot of different experimentation around this part. I think the original design for these rocks wound up looking far too busy, and you'll slowly see that develop over time. It just didn't read very well, and given the size that we were aiming to get this logo printed out at, I was just worried that it would look like an absolute mess from a distance. There are a lot of things that I tried out to try and separate the hand from the rock just to make it look a lot less busy, adding in shadows or adding in more shadows to the rock. It really wasn't an easy process, but luckily because Affinity Designer is a vector app, I was able to separate everything onto separate layers. That said, I really did make an absolute mess of this project file. As I said earlier, originally this was only meant to be a draft, and then I got so carried away working in it that I really didn't want to start from scratch, so I just kept sort of duplicating things and plugging away at it. Because of the way that every element is joined together, and the fact that everything is going to essentially be one shape, I kind of followed a fairly destructive workflow where I would constantly be doing things where there was no going back from unless you undid like everything you had done previously. Luckily, this wasn't a professional gig, and if it was, I probably would have gone about this in a very different way, especially because I'd constantly be providing drafts and updates to a client. So yeah, this was definitely an exercise in like just how far I could go without having to go back. And yeah, like the rock wall didn't really turn out looking the best at first, but everybody seemed to really like the way it turned out in the end. And that's all that matters, really. So a lot of the line work that I did for this rock wall wound up being drawn with the pencil tool. And I hadn't really done that for a lot of line work before, and I have to say I quite like it. Not particularly for this design, because we all know like we want this printed and we want it to read really well, but I think I wouldn't mind trying some later projects that are like hyper detailed with all of these sort of crazy strokes and line widths and whatnot, just to sort of see what I come up with. It looks like a really interesting style, and I haven't really played around with it much more since. Hopefully I get the time to try something out like that in the future. might see me throwing a few textures on top just to sort of see how things would look without me sort of having to sit down and sketch all of that detail out. But in the end, I decided to scrap it and start from scratch on the rock wall. This time I wanted to be a lot more careful in just how much detail there was and put in a lot less lines, still make it look like a rock of some sort, but just not have it taking up the bulk of the image. When I was drawing these, I was looking at a lot of different references for like different slate and different cliff faces, just to sort of see how different parts of the rock would form and where cracks would form. Would cracks split off into different directions and whatnot, and just sort of cherry pick things that I like and then place them in there. At this point, I was really worried that a lot of the image was going to be solid white, so I decided to fill in a lot of the rock faces, but still make sure that you could see the line work. And I think this works really well, because it makes the hand stand out, but you can still see that the hand is touching an object that is separate to it. I guess my biggest priority when working on this image was readability, just trying to ensure that no matter what size this image was displayed at, people would easily be able to see what it was. Now I'm just doing a bunch of cleanup and coming in here and just shifting points around and making everything a lot neater. Because a lot of this was drawn with the pencil tool, there are a lot of anchor points all over the place. So I wanted to take the time to remove any unnecessary anchor points and just make everything a lot more manageable if I needed to edit it further. Now, in typical RSKT fashion, I once again forgot to record the final stages of this process. What wound up happening is I got Phoebe over because she's really good with a lot of this sort of stuff, and we nutted out the rest together, the placement of the text and how thick the circles should be. We cleaned up a lot of the extra anchor points that weren't there, and then slowly merged everything together before sitting down to find a print provider. So now that the final design was done, it was time to find a print provider. Narrowing down the options wasn't too difficult because at the end of the day, we went with direct-to-garment printing just because it was cheapest. And there are a lot of direct-to-garment printers out there, you know, internationally and locally. So yeah, we just picked sort of a local one. We went with ScreenLab, and a lot of different places pretty much work like this. The idea is that you upload a PNG of your logo and then position it where you'd like it to be on your hoodie or on whatever item you're having printed onto, and then they'll tell you the costs and send it off to you. It was really awesome to hear that everybody was really happy with how the hoodies turned out, and I've been climbing in mine every time I go out in winter, and it's been really fun. So yeah, that's all I got time for you guys today, and I hope that fills the void because I know it's been a little while since I've uploaded. I do have so many videos in the pipeline that I need to get through, but yeah, just gonna have to be patient, and I'll get around to them as soon as I can. Anyways, hit the like if you like, and if you don't, tell me why. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.